And welcome back. Asian Americans Advancing Justice's mission is to advance the civil and human rights of Asian Americans and to build and promote a fair and equitable society for all. Now, the organization is the voice for the Asian American community fighting for civil rights through education, litigation, and public policy, as well as advocacy. We got joining us now the the senior director of strategic initiatives at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Marita Etcubañez. I believe I've got it correctly. If not, she'll correct me. And Maria, good to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and so when we talk about your mission of really advancing the cause for Asian Americans, because we do know that when it comes to inequality, that many times Asian Americans find themselves on the other side.
Yes, you have articulated the mission of our organization. We do work to preserve civil rights for the Asian American community and to empower our communities. Um, but I think it's also important to emphasize that we're also working to create a more just America for everyone. So we're located in Washington, D.C., and our focus is on federal policy advocacy, working to safeguard immigrant rights, to eliminate hate and discrimination in all its forms, and also advocating for increased civic engagement. Now, we also have affiliates, advancing justice affiliates in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Atlanta that some people might be more familiar with. And our affiliates are focused on legal services and community building. But in the DC office, we are, as I mentioned, focused on federal policy advocacy.
Yeah. And so when we talk about advocacy, talk to me about the issues that you're really dealing with front and center right now. What do you find to be some of the biggest challenges that are actually being faced by the Asian American community?
Thank you for that question. There are so many. But in particular, in the last few years, the Asian American community has, I think as many are aware, faced increased anti Asian hate due to people's concerns about COVID 19 and their fears about that, which are also connected to anti China rhetoric. We have been working to provide resources for people who have experienced hate crimes or hate incidents, working to support impacted communities, and to encourage people to come forward and report and share their stories to help us build a better understanding of what our communities have been facing and to help us advocate for better informed policies to respond to this increased anti Asian hate and violence. And also, a constant challenge that our communities have faced that Advancing Justice AAJC has worked on since our organization was founded more than 30 years ago has been working to reform our country's deeply flawed immigration system. Asian Americans make up more than 30% of the immigrant population in the United States, and it's a community that is only growing in number. And we know that Asian American families are disproportionately impacted by our outdated family immigration policies. And so we have been steadfast in our advocacy for immigration policy reform, in particular, measures that would unite families that have been kept apart by our immigration laws and policies.
When we talk about immigration policies, obviously I've spoken with a lot of immigration attorneys, and they'll tell you there's a huge backlog, particularly uh, after COVID, but before COVID, things were just very challenging by way of immigration. Give us a little bit of insight as to some of that immigration. Do you still find that that backlog is there, and it's quite harder for those people to get papers?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So, our current immigration system, which was really overhauled in 1965 due to the influence of the civil rights movement, before 1965, US immigration law heavily favored immigrants from Northern and Western Europe. Um, the immigration system was opened up in 1965, which is a good thing. But our systems haven't been significantly improved since then. And since there are limits on the number of immigrants that can come in different family categories and the number of immigrants that can come from any one country in a given year, this is what has resulted in the backlogs that we often talk about. And for certain countries and for certain family categories, that backlog is more than 20 years long. So even people who I mean, I hate to use this rhetoric, but are trying to do things the right way and are trying to work within the system still find themselves facing decades long waits to be granted permission to immigrate to the United States. And in this case, in the family system, these are family members that have been separated for decades. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about our flawed immigration system. Um, one of many flaws, but in particular, this is what Advancing Justice AAJC has focused on for many years now.
Yeah, we hear a lot when it comes to anti-Asian rhetoric,
Mhm.
uh, hate, being singled out, and I know that for yourself, that's where the work begins. Talk to me. How are you, is the agency working, and how are you working to really combat this? Because when we hear of some of the things that are happening, they're admittedly frightening and also disgusting.
No, thank you for expressing that. I'll begin by saying that anti-Asian hate and discrimination, it's not new. Our communities have faced discrimination from the beginning, from when we first came to the United States. And people that are familiar with Asian American history can give you many, many examples of um, the discrimination and the hate that our communities have endured over the years. But as we have talked about, and as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic really felt like it unleashed and emboldened a lot of people's anti-Asian sentiment. And it certainly didn't help to have elected officials, including our former president, labeling it as the China virus and using other negative terms that, for many of us, it really felt like it painted a target on our backs, on Chinese Americans and more broadly Asian Americans. Um, so, our community has deeply felt the impact. And it's overwhelmingly the reports that we have received to Advancing Justice's Stand Against Hatred website and the reports that have been submitted to the site Stop AAPI Hate that was started at the beginning of the pandemic are overwhelmingly about verbal abuse and harassment, not necessarily hate crimes. But we also know that our community has endured really horrible violence in recent years, including a number of mass shootings that have really resulted in, a lot of fear and anxiety for Asian Americans that continues. I mean, some people may feel that, anti-Asian hate was at its height a couple of years ago. And while that may be true, it continues, and many in our community continue to be fearful and anxious about facing harassment or even violence when they're out and about.
We talk about uh, hate, and we talk about immigration. We talked about really how to raise the voice, and your agency has actually worked to raise its voice. We see on a daily basis uh, pictures that are coming up when it deals with migrants coming into the United States. It makes the question of immigration come to the front and center again. Talk to me about this because I want to, get a little insight into family immigration. How do you see it right now here in the United States, and what are you doing on that end to really help with family migration?
Yeah, so one of the bills that we have long championed, legislative proposal, is the Reuniting Families Act that contains many of the provisions that we feel are needed to improve the family immigration system so that families can be reunited in more timely fashion, so that people aren't subjected to these decades long waits. That's a big part of what we need. But you also mentioned the border. Um, and Advancing Justice AAJC has, joined with our allies in calling for the repeal of Title 42, one of the harmful border policies. And I think there's still a lot of concern about what's happening at the border, and we really feel that the asylum system needs to remain open for people that are fleeing violence and persecution. And really, just overall, we need to be able to build an immigration system that is more fair and humane for everybody.
I know another piece of work that you're doing is our Value Our Families campaign, and I know that that's pretty near and dear to you. Talk to us about the work that's going on with the Value of Families campaign, but first, let's educate our viewers on what exactly the campaign is all about.
Sure. So first, I mentioned, working with partners. The Value Our Families campaign is a campaign that has been led by a coalition of immigrant advocacy groups. There are many of us that have been involved in this. The campaign was created about 5 years ago, and its goals are to protect, preserve, and strengthen the family immigration system. And we're really leading with our values here, and to promote an immigration system that is informed by love, empathy, and justice. So it's trying to build an immigration system that works for families. We're opposing measures that would harm family immigration. Yeah.
And when we talk about family immigration, I mean, people will say that it's not so big an issue. Immigration, you know, and they'll try and piece things apart. But family immigration is important. It's near and dear to so many people. Why, if I was to have someone here that says, listen, family immigration, why does that matter? Give us your take.
Sure. Um, so it's really important for immigrants to be able to establish themselves and build roots in the United States. It's vital that they are able to immigrate with their families. And US law and policy recognizes that. Family reunification has been one of the central tenets in our immigration laws and policies for a long time. So, you know, families support one another, we take care of each other. And it's really vital that when people immigrate, they are able to bring their spouse, their children, and our immigration system also permits people to bring their parents, their siblings, because we recognize the centrality of family unity. I think for anyone, regardless of their political beliefs, if you family is important for all of us, right? So I think recognizing that that is core to our immigration system, I feel that, if we all pause, most people would recognize that we really do need to improve our laws and policies so that we're not just talking about the importance of family, but that the system actually works to bring families together and not tear family members apart.
Yeah. Spend a few moments with me talking about anti-hate because I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. One of the things that I've heard from so many people when it comes to the effects of COVID-19 is that we've seen more people with hatred. As a matter of fact, we know that we were home, we were watching, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, uh, Ahmaud Arbery. We saw hatred at its worst, and we saw, injustice at its worst for times during COVID. For yourself, give me a little bit about what you saw during the pandemic when it came to anti-Asian hate.
hmm this was an incredibly hard time for so many of us, right? But I
Mhm.
think also in particular Asian American communities, because we were all dealing with the pandemic and all of the tensions and stress and grief that that brought up. But then on a daily basis, hearing news reports about Asian Americans that were being attacked, whether it was in the form of verbal abuse on the street, physical assaults, or even, horrendous violence in the form of mass shootings, like this just really compounded a lot of the fear and anxiety that Asian Americans were facing. We have a lot of statistics to back this up. It's not just, anecdotal stories, although I know we all have them. We all have people in our lives that can speak to facing anti Asian hate. Um, I mentioned already our website, Stand Against Hatred. The Stop AAPI Hate site has compiled more than 11,000 individual stories of anti Asian hate and harassment that people have brought to their attention. The FBI hate crime statistics for 2021, which were just updated this spring, show the highest number of hate crimes in the United States in more than 2 decades, and in particular demonstrate a huge spike in hate crimes motivated by anti Asian hate. Um, and we could share so many stories about what our communities have been facing. And again, I know some people have responded by unfortunately isolating themselves because of their fears about being targeted. Um, it's been a really challenging time for so many, but I will also say that we have seen a lot of people come forward, banding together to protest against anti Asian hate, to demonstrate their support and solidarity with Asian American communities. And even beyond that, I have seen many people from the Asian American community join in broader social justice protests, including, in 2020, the many marches and demonstrations in support of the Black Lives Matter movement.
And when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, obviously it galvanized a lot of attention. Did you think that it really helped to really shine a light on uh, Asian American? I mean, I should say, anti-Asian hate, because you got one group over here that's saying, "Listen, we need to pay attention," but you have on another side a wider flashlight that's really seems to be being placed just on the issue of injustice, on the issue of hatred, on the issue of violence. I mean, I think that while people had some, some really hard things to say about Black Lives Matter on the negative side, I think there's a lot of great things that came out of Black Lives Matter, and that being one of them.
Yes, I think that the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the mobilization that has been part of that really has, as you said, shined a light on racial discrimination and injustice in this country. And I think as a lot of people engaged in introspection, right, and we're trying to think of how they could be, better allies to impacted communities, communities of color, how they could work on becoming anti-racist themselves. Um, I do think that a lot of people recognized how so many of these issues impacting vulnerable communities are interconnected. Um, and so I think it's fair to say that it wasn't just Asian Americans advocating on Asian American issues, although certainly we saw a lot of that, and it's a good thing, but that people from different communities were stepping out and demonstrating their support for all communities impacted by hate and violence. And I think that is something that we need to continue to support. Again, I think that a lot of people might look at, the marches and demonstrations from 2020 and feel like that is done. I think it's really incumbent on all of us to make sure that none of this is done, right? That the work continues, and that when we talk about solidarity, we're doing it for real, that we are working to support one another and not just speaking up when we feel our own communities are directly impacted.
Right. Uh, let's go back to your agency and the work that you do, really trying to make sure that you're a strong voice and advocate. What are some of the priorities and initiatives that you find to be very paramount right now that we, the public, can be paying attention to try to help to bolster the work that you're doing?
Thank you. So, I think it's important to highlight that we did mark a significant victory in May of 2021 with passage of the federal COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which was, frankly, I was surprised, passed with overwhelming support in both the Senate and the House, and obviously signed into law by the president, that would improve how law enforcement responds to and compiles and reports data on hate crimes, where there's still a lot of work to be done. So we felt that that was a really important um, win. And we continue to advocate for proper implementation of that law, because law enforcement agencies are still in the process of transitioning to this new reporting system. And we saw a lot of issues with the latest release of hate crimes data from the FBI, the 2021 hate crimes data that was initially released in December of last year, but the FBI has since released supplemental data, which is much more accurate. But the fact that we've sort of done this in fits and starts points to the fact that we really need law enforcement agencies to complete that transition quickly and effectively so that we have better data on hate crimes, so that we and policymakers have a better and fuller understanding of what our communities have been facing and can craft better solutions accordingly. Um, you know, when it comes to advocacy, an important thing to raise for the Asian American community, since a significant portion of our population, we're still a largely immigrant community, has limited proficiency in English. And so language access is really an important part of our advocacy, trying to ensure that when people seek to access government benefits and services, if they don't speak English well, that their limited English ability doesn't serve as a barrier to their accessing programs and services. And this is, of course, really important in the context of people that have experienced hate crimes and hate incidents. We don't want someone's inability to speak English to be what prevents them from getting the help they need, whether that's from law enforcement or social service agencies. I could say a lot more, but let me pause here and let you ask questions.
No, no, no. You're doing well. I mean, I think really the conversation needs to be had, and you do a great job of being, a much needed voice. And I think that's the issue, that we want to talk about how we can help to raise the voice, because we're all in this together. And when it comes to the issue of inequality, when it comes to the issue of social inequality, we need to hear, and it's very different sometimes because Asian Americans, Asians can feel something totally different than, those who may be of Latino descent. Those could be of Indian descent, right? So the challenges vary, but however, there's the same unique foundation. So to hear some of the unique challenges, to know how the voice can be raised collectively to support, is much needed.
Thank you. And so I think one thing that we should talk about more is, one of these solutions we advocate for on addressing anti-Asian hate is actually fuller and more robust teaching of all of our histories as part of public education. So we, of course, are focused on teaching and Asian American history, because there's a lot of lessons that many of us didn't learn when we were coming up, in elementary and high school. And for many of us, we didn't get to learn about Asian American history until maybe college, and for some people, maybe never, right? So we are advocating for more inclusive teaching and honest teaching about race in the United States. So this is something where, again, we are leading with um, Asian American history, but of course, we feel that it's important that fuller history of all people in the United States needs to be incorporated into public education curricula. And well, we feel that that's a good thing, full stop, but also that more diverse education is really one of the things that we need to help break down stereotypes, break down misunderstandings, and help all of us better understand the contributions of all people that make up our diverse country.
So if people want to get connected, how do they go about getting connected to the work that you're doing and become more aware?
That's a great question. Thank you. So, in response to, in particular, increased anti Asian hate, we have done a number of things to build up our capacity to better serve the community. And one of the programs that we have built that I am particularly proud of is our work with an organization named Right to Be. Some people might better know them by their past name, which was Hollaback. They're based in New York, and they have been providing training on how to respond to street harassment for many years. At the beginning of the pandemic, they reached out to us and asked if we would be interested in adapting their training to the context of anti Asian hate. We, of course, said yes. And with the launch of our first training in April 2020, we had over 1,000 people register for each of those free webinars. So it was clear that we were meeting a need as people were eager to learn about what they could do individually to support the Asian American community. But more importantly, I think, also importantly, learn about what they could do to help take care of themselves and others when they witness harassment happening. So at this point, several years on, we have reached and trained more than 150,000 people. We continue to offer our trainings with Right to Be free of charge. They're 1 hour sessions that are available online, so they're very accessible. So we encourage people to, if they haven't already taken advantage of that training, find one of our upcoming sessions and join us. So you can, as we say in the training, become part of our movement to end hate and harassment in all of its forms. But it's not just on the individual. We're talking about huge systemic problems, systemic racism, addressing white supremacy. And these issues, complex issues, require solutions at many different levels. So I've talked about advancing justice AAJC's policy advocacy. We would love for more people to get involved in our work, whether it's to advance immigration reform, whether it's to improve response to hate crimes and hate incidents and discrimination generally, um, or to advance more diverse teaching, and encourage people to take a look at our website, and see the different campaigns that we have going. Sign up to receive our emails and action alerts so that you can get involved. And then, I realize that advocacy work might feel sort of out of reach for a lot of people, and I get that, but it really isn't. um, Also encourage people to get involved in your local community. There are so many organizations and individuals that have been working to address, injustice that they see in their neighborhoods. So get involved in different organizations and coalitions. If you're concerned about, for example, the state of education, book bans, all of that, if you're not already participating in your local school board meetings or your PTA, that's a great way to get plugged in, learn about what's going on, and add your voice to what you feel is needed to build, a more just society for everybody.
Well, Marita, we want to thank you so much for being with us, giving us more information. Want to let people know that if you want to find out, she is the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and that is AAAJ. You can also find her out on social media, and the website, and certainly a lot of things to discuss. And I'm glad that you spent some time telling with us today about the issues, and not just the issues, but also the great work that you're doing in terms of providing some much needed solutions. Marita, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
All righty.